Hello, everyone. It's Phil Jones, and I am actually in Arad in Maryland. And joining me is Scott Orth. So, Scott, what is Arad, and what do you do?
So, Arad stands for It's not an acronym, but it's Audio and Acoustics Research and Development. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of the speaker design and development for brands like Polk, Definitive, and some others.
Yes.
in our group of brands.
Okay, so today we're here to talk about a new addition to the Definitive Technology lineup, which is the Dymension series, which is the replacement for the BP9000. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some differences between the Dymension and the previous BP9000?
Well, there's quite a lot. In fact, most things have changed. So the biggest difference is that we've gone to a symmetrical bipolar array. So for the BP8000, the BP9000, we had the forward focus array, where there's 6 dB more output on the front side than there is in the rear. Now we're back to symmetrical, it's equal.
Scott was nice enough to bring a speaker with the sock off. Because a lot of times when you look at a Definitive Technology speaker, one of these towers, you don't get a chance to see all of the things that are inside. And one thing that's different between the BP series and this one is there's an equal amount of drivers on the front and the back, because now both are radiating at the same intensity, I guess level. So what's one of the advantages for bipolar over to normal speakers that just fire front fire?
Listening to bipolar, the whole idea is you're creating more space. You're making this really big sound. Mm-hmm. And by increasing the amount that's coming out of the rear, you get more ambience because more is being reflected into the room. Mm-hmm. So it gives you more, I like to call it bigonation. You get this, bigger sound stage. So that's the biggest difference.
Okay, so and previously it was forward focus, which meant there were some coming out of the back.
Sure.
6 dB down is what you said. Now, what happens if a customer kind of like that original Definitive sound? Can they is only bipolar the only option for this particular speaker?
No, so we did put a switch in on the DM6070 and the DM40 as well. We have a switch on the back that'll turn the tweeter on the rear down 6 dB, so you get the kind of forward focus effect there. And then on the DM80, the two arrays are fully independent, and you can turn the entire rear array down 6 dB to get a forward focus.
Okay, so on the big DM80, there, instead of a switch, it's basically how it's wired. There's
binding posts.
Yeah, there's binding posts.
Yeah, once the symmetrical array, and then if you want to change it, you just move it to the other binding post and get forward focus.
Okay, and so that gives you the ability to fine tune it. Now, why would someone maybe choose to do more of a forward focus or cut down the rear output versus just using them as bipolar?
Well, there's several reasons. One could just be taste, and to like the forward focus sound better. The other is, as you get closer to the rear wall or the front wall, depending on your perspective, that reflection from the rear array is going to get stronger and stronger. Mm-hmm. So if it gets to the point where it's a bit too much for you, you go and adjust it back down to the forward focus to tame that a bit.
And a lot of times it may just be personal taste, right? Because we were talking about that. And we've played multiple demos here. And if you ask half the group if they liked it bipolar and half the group if they liked it with it more forward focused, there was a combination. But everybody agreed that the bipolar sound was bigger. And maybe the forward focus one had maybe a little bit more of a drier sound. I guess that's the best way that you'd like to put it.
A little drier, a little more collapsed to the speakers, a little bit, yeah. Okay,
so let me ask you, the geeks, do you toe them in? Do you leave them straight?
Yeah.
What do you recommend?
Again, it's to taste. What you'll find is that if you toe them in, you're going to get a little bit more direct sound, because now that back wave that's coming off the loudspeaker is going more toward the corner than into directly in front of you. So that's another way to kind of adjust the amount of ambience you're getting in the room, is to toe them in or toe them out. Some people like them straightforward, so they get the maximum amount of ambience that way, and some folks like it towed in a little bit to dry it up a little bit.
The new speaker, the Dymension, has a different radiation pattern than what was on the BP tower. Forward focus versus bipolar. On top of that, pretty much every driver and even the amplifier in these are new, correct?
Yep, everything's new.
So let's first talk about the tweeter. The tweeter looks pretty similar to the previous one that you would find in maybe a BP tower or even a demand series speaker. How is it different? What's new about it?
Yeah, so the waveguide kind of to the untrained eyes is very similar to what we've had in like demand or BP9000, but the dome material and what's behind the dome material is different. So we've got a new dome that we call the aluminum oxide dome, and that's a fairly thick aluminum oxide coating on an aluminum base, and it's also got a fabric surround, we call it, the part that goes from the dome to the frame, and that helps to damp out resonances in the dome. So it's a very good sounding tweeter. It's very natural sounding. We like it a little better than the older tweeter, and we've been enjoying it.
Yeah, I have noticed that it's a little smoother, a little less sizzle. Very, very pleasing. Still sounds like a Definitive speaker. So if you like the way Definitive sounds, you still have those characteristics, but it is a little bit smoother. Now, moving on, if you look at the top of the speaker there, you'll see that there's the tweeter, but there's also two BDS drivers. So what does BDS stand for, by the way?
So BDSS is Balanced Dual Suspension System. Thanks, sometimes I forget. So, and then what that's talking about is, if I can pull one up here, is we call this a surround on the outer part of the driver here. Mm-hmm. There's also one that's attached to the pole on the inside. So that's the dual part of it. Mm-hmm. And what those do is they work in concert to keep the motion of the cone linear, which helps reduce distortion.
Have it move pistonically.
That's right.
I got that from Scott. So because one of the biggest challenges with any cone is making sure that it moves properly straight forward and backwards and without any kind of wobbly and stuff like that. So manufacturers are always looking for ways to do that. Now there's also the waveguide on the driver. What is that and what does that do?
So the linear response waveguide has gone through some evolution over the years. We've taken this mostly from the demand series. They look very similar. We did a little bit of tweaking to it, but its job is to increase the off-axis dispersion of the driver. And it does that by blocking the interfering sound from the opposite side of the driver as you move on and off-axis.
So it really helps off-axis response, smooths up everything else. Now, the interesting thing about this, as you tour around Arad, you'll see that there's a pack of engineers here. This whole place is engineers. And a lot of all these designs are done in-house, right? You don't just buy that off the counter, off the shelf. So how do you develop that?
We design all the drivers for all the speakers we work on. Well, I shouldn't say all of them, but nearly all of them. And it's done by a combination of 30 plus years of experience. Plus, we do a lot of computer-aided engineering, FEA and AutoCAD, things like that.
You basically design those drivers specifically for the jobs that they're designed to do. So you're not trying to buy something off the shelf and bend it to your will using crossovers and resistors and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think you get basically better bang for your buck. Would you say that?
Sure. Plus, when you're pushing the limits of performance, every little bit counts, right? Every little piece of the transducer has to be designed for its purpose, or you're not going to get there.
And I've seen some pretty sophisticated tools you guys have for measuring cone movement, distortion. And one day we're popping into a tour of Arad so you can see some of the cool kind of testing equipment and things that you actually have here. So new mid-range drivers or mid-bass drivers, a new tweeter, new dispersion pattern. But one thing that's always made one of these big Definitive towers unique is a powered subwoofer array built into the bottom of the speaker. Can you talk about what's the benefit of having a powered subwoofer array?
No, there's lots of benefits. Number one, the crossover between the mid-ranges and the woofer can tend to be lower, which is good because the more bandwidth you give to the mid-ranges, the more natural the speaker tends to sound. Plus, in a bipolar array, if you have the interference between the front and the rear at the low frequencies can be a problem sometimes. But so we've got that lower crossover point. You've got power, as much power as you need or want for that woofer, as opposed to whatever you're plugging it into has, like your receiver or whatever. So we can and we can also tune the system to match the enclosure that we have, which we couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, and so less load on the amplifier, better ability to tune the bass, and we've always talked about having more than one subwoofer in the room is always beneficial. Can you talk about the benefit of having multiple subwoofers in a space instead of maybe having just one tucked over in the corner?
So there's two main benefits. One, it's louder. Obviously, you get twice as much if you have two subs. The other is that multiple subwoofers will help to control room modes better than a single subwoofer, and that helps to smooth out the bass response and also gives you more coverage area. So there's not as much of a sweet spot.
Yeah. And there's also a higher partner approval factor because less boxes in the room. It's a lot easier to get two towers in a space than two towers and two subwoofers. So it's easier placement, more installation flexibility because loaded up against the wall, you can turn the bass down. It's further out from the wall, you can turn the bass up. So you have the ability to tune more. Smaller amplifier can drive systems to higher levels.
I should say there's one more real key issue there, and that's that we can blend the mid-ranges and the woofer together very well. And if you're doing that separately with a loudspeaker and a subwoofer, that can get to be a bit of a chore, or in some cases very difficult to accomplish. But we've done that for the user.
Yeah. Now, speaking of blending, let's talk a little bit about intelligent bass control. That's another definitive feature that has evolved going from the BP9000 to the Dymension. Can you talk about what intelligent bass control is?
Sure. So with previous powered towers, in a lot of cases when you're turning the knob, it's basically a volume control for the subwoofer. And depending on where that subwoofer is crossed over, that might not be what you want when you say you want more bass. So in a lot of cases, you just turn the knob on your subwoofer, turn it up and down, and you're getting all this extra mid-bass and lower mid-range along with it, as opposed to just that lower, rumble and thump that is what you're looking for. So with the BP9000 line, we have tackled that with intelligent bass control, and that's what that knob did, is instead of just doing a volume control on the woofer, it actually gave you more just bass. So you could hear like a string bass line or electric guitar or whatever. And that part of it wouldn't get all muddy and rumbly. It would you just get more on the low end, more of the kick drum, more of the deep bass notes and stuff like that. So it didn't muddy up the sound.
As you turn the intelligent bass control up, it ensures that the subwoofers remain blended. That's a lot more work to do that. Most people would have just given you more volume. They wouldn't have taken the time to ensure that at every step on that knob, it's optimized for that step on that knob. Okay. Now, one thing you'll notice too, when you look at the back of a new Dymension speaker with powered subs, there is no LFE. And there's a reason for that because you didn't want that LFE connection on the back of the original powered tower. So can you talk about why it's better to let the speaker determine how to deal with the bass versus using an LFE to do that?
Yeah, sure. So we've taken care of the crossover for the user, right? When you plug in and you get set it to large, you're sending all the information to the speaker, and we divide it up into the transducers in a way that we think sounds good. And if you want more bass, you can go ahead and turn up the knob, right? So there was this kind of myth that, well, if I plug the LFE out of my receiver into the LFE of my bipolar speakers, I'll get more bass. And the problem with that is you had these filters that were being activated that were actually causing interference in the summing of the signal from the main input and the LFE input, so you would get less bass. So, and we tried to explain, well, we don't want this LFE because it's only going to cause trouble. You have to be very knowledgeable to be able to use it properly. There's a possibility of using it properly, but most people are not going to do that. And so we won that battle finally on the Dymension line and got rid of it because it really wasn't doing anybody any favors. I mean, if you want more bass, that's what that knob's for.
So if you have a pair of Dymension towers with powered subs, set your receiver to large. And if you don't have a subwoofer, because the nice thing is you probably don't need one, you can just say no subwoofer. All your LFA information will go to the mains or the large speakers that have the subwoofers built in. Now, Nick has a couple of components. So like with every other thing in this system, it's all been upgraded. So we talked about the fact that while just like the old BP towers, these have a powered subwoofer system, even the drivers and the amplifiers in the bass section of this speaker has been improved, right?
That's right.
So let's first talk about the, you made some improvements to the drivers, right?
So this is a sub out of the DM80, I think it is, the 12-inch sub. And we added a few changes to this. It's a long throw subwoofer, which, I guess everybody kind of says that. But what we added this time around were some what we call shorting rings. And these, you can't see it on the actual model here, but inside there are these aluminum sleeves that are placed near the voice coil on the pole, and what they do is they reduce intermodulation distortion, flux modulation, and they reduce the inductance of the woofer. So what that means in a real sense is it'll play louder, cleaner.
Mm-hmm. If you look at the tower, it's pretty slim.
Yeah.
So now you're trying to put a long for a woofer in a slim cabinet, and that's also another challenge you have to
tackle. It's a big challenge, sure. Yeah, you gotta shorten up parts of the design. If we'd had our way, this would have been an inch or so deeper or whatever, but then a challenge, and we got it done though. Yeah. They sound great.
Now, another thing that's kind of unique is instead of using ports, you use base radiators. Can you talk about what a base radiator is and what's the benefit of a base radiator over a port that you would see on most speakers?
Yeah, so ports and base radiators have similar functions. What they're doing is they're using the energy that's being pushed into the cabinet, using it to create a little bit more low bass at the expense of some very low bass. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of differences between what you can do with a port and what you can do with a base radiator. So let's see. One of the big things people will notice with ports is they make chuffing noises. Mm-hmm. They make noises as you start to push them really hard. Base radiators don't have as much of that problem. They do make some noise if you push them too hard, but they tend to be a little bit more benign. Base radiators tend to be more flexible. You can tune them to a lower frequency in a smaller cabinet, which when you're working with things that are very slim and stuff, that becomes very important. So ports also have a resonance of their own, so they whistle mm-hmm. like a pipe organ, mm-hmm. right? And base radiators we don't have to deal with.
Okay, so less unwanted noises while still maximizing the bass output. So there's a 12-inch woofer, so this is the big guy, the mm-hmm. DM80 has a 12-inch woofer and 2 base radiators. Why 2 instead of just 1?
So the base radiators tend to work at the very lowest frequencies in the subwoofer, and the law is that as you go an octave lower in frequency, you need to increase the excursion by 4 times. So if you were to take, say, a woofer, and let's say you were playing 40 hertz and you needed 10 millimeters of excursion at 40 hertz to get the level you wanted the same level at 20 hertz. Now you got to go 40 millimeters, mm-hmm. which is a lot. So if you double the surface area, you cut that in half, right? So now I only have to do 20 millimeters. So the whole idea is to get enough surface area such that the net volume of air being moved mm-hmm. is correct.
Yeah, so deep bass, deep clean bass, and that's one thing you'll notice when you look at Dymension.
So here's one of the new bass radiators, and one of the things you'll notice that's different between these guys and the previous models is that we've added a second suspension element to mm-hmm. it, which what that does is it helps, again,
move pistonically
motion. So you've got what we call 2 moments that keep it moving straight in and out, reduces the amount of rocking mm-hmm. and distortion, and anything that's creating distortion is not creating bass.
Now, last but not least, because it's a powered bass section or subwoofer section, you need an amplifier. Yeah. So you even redid the amplification in this speaker as well, right?
That's right. With the DM80, we have our new GaNFET-based amplifier. That thing's really cool. It runs very cool, so it requires very little heat sink. It has very low distortion. It's like 10 times lower than what we've had in the past. And we also integrated a new processor into it to give us more bit depth for more accurate EQ, more accurate limiting. It's just better and cleaner all around.
Now, also, let's talk a little bit about the back. You have like the back. Is there anything you want to cover about the back of the unit?
So the DM80 input section here is a little different. What we've got here is several binding posts. There's a main speaker input, and you unpack the box. You want to plug and go. You just plug your amp right in here. Everybody's good to go. What you can do with this setup, though, is we've got, like I said before, we've got the symmetric bipolar. We've also got an input for the forward focus. So you would just take the lead off of this one
and swing it down
here now, and the
pretty
actual
quickly.
unit it's up here. So you move it upwards.
Okay.
And
then above that is the height.
These guys are just the height.
And that's when you plug the height in, put the module on top.
Yeah,
you're good to go. And then the other one has instead of having that on the lower models, it's a switch.
That's right, just a switch. Now the other thing you can do with the DM80 that you can't do with the 60 or the 70 is that you can take the jumpers out and you can bi-wire this front and rear range separately. Two lines coming from your amplifier, or you can bi-amp the front and rear range separately. So that means that you run a signal to the front, you run a signal to the rear. You can either do regular symmetric bipolar, or you can do the forward focus. Or, as we've done in some cases, is you can put an attenuator or something between the two amplifiers. So the second amplifier that's running the rears, and connect that to the rear, and then you can control the level of the rear to whatever you want.
Okay, so basically you can really fine tune it to your personal taste. Is when you look at a Dymension, what you'll notice is it'll blend really well into a room because it's not a lot of things that are going to stand out. It's there to give you a big experience without really calling a ton of attention to itself. But there's a lot of technology behind the speaker, which is why I wanted Scott to come and talk about it. Because when you look at it with the sock down, is where you really start saying how much is in this thing. You got the two BDS drivers in the front, BDSS drivers in the front, the two in the back, the two tweeters, the bass radiators, the subwoofer, the amplifier. I mean, when you see the sleeve off, it's really start saying how much goes into this, how much of a value it is to have that. It's literally equivalent of basically 2 pairs of bookshelves and a powered subwoofer in a box. And a big definitive subwoofer can when you see how much that costs by itself compared to having that built in, you can see the value that is actually in that speaker.
A lot of chocolate chips in our cookies.
A lot of chocolate chips in the cookie. Chips Ahoy, double chips. Now there's one more thing that's kind of neat is a lot of times these are used for home theater. So a height module. You guys have a really nice way of integrating a height module with this unit as well, right?
Sure. Yeah. The DM90. There's a panel on top of the speaker. There's a logo plate. Push on the logo plate, and there's a connector inside. You take the DM90, you put it on the connector, and you've got a height speaker.
Yeah. So really simple. When you put it in there, it just looks like a little bit taller of a speaker. Very simple.
Yeah, the idea is the same grill cloth and everything.
The speaker grew a couple of inches, so it really is a well integrated thing. And a little later, when I talk to Mike, he's over there, we'll talk about the whole lineup and all the different options that are available and why we came up with all of those particular options. But I really wanted to come and just talk to you about this speaker and all of the work you did, because over the last 2 days, we've been incredibly impressed with what I've heard. And I think you guys out there, when you get a chance to hear them, are going to be just as impressed as I am. So Scott, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
And hopefully you guys have learned a little bit about the Dymension speakers. So take care, and I'll talk to you soon.